Oh, having a bit of a chat. Because the panel are here, Layla Softitch, who's the public affairs analyst, and Harrison Griffiths, who is political commentator and communications officer at the IEA.
Institute of Economic Affairs.
That's the one. Thank you very much. And good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We're going to kick off with this ultra low emission zone. Now, we are aware that this is very London-based at the moment, but this is the sort of thing that could be coming to a city near you soon. And this is about the fact that today there is a demonstration, going to be a demonstration in Trafalgar Square about the expansion of the ultra low emission zone. Who is going to, for people who don't know, who's going to explain the ultra low emission zone?
Oh, yes, of course. The ultra-low emission zone is basically going to be a tax or a fine, if you will, on average people who just have older cars that don't meet whatever standards are implemented by Sadiq Khan and his group of very lovely environmental specialists.
Right. So so essentially it's about vehicles which don't meet the, if you like, green criteria.
Yes, exactly.
And you therefore have to pay £12.50 to get into this ultra low emission zone, or ULEZ, which is what they call it. And they're saying it's to try to make sure that actually the air that is breathed in cities is cleaner. That's the
without any evidence that this will achieve that. Sorry.
Yes.
so the ULEZ already exists in central London. The change here is to expand it. N25 basically, and the evidence so far, as I understand it, in terms of the impact on the air makes quite negligible difference.
Yeah, and a study by Imperial College has shown that it's had a very, very small impact, and the reality is most of the other policies that have been implemented have created that. Any change that has happened is a result of all those policies rather than just ULEZ. Yeah. And I think it's such an omission of all the other polluting factors that happen in a big city of, a medium-sized
The other thing is
size.
London has got probably the best air that it's had for 60 years. And this argument by Sadiq that children are dying, well, no, that's not true. There is one child, sadly, and every death is very sad, who has had air pollution as a contributory factor to her asthma. But also, if he's so worried about children dying, you don't let people carry on using it but say you have to pay me to kill children. You say you can't use your car anymore. But he's not saying that. He's saying, OK, it's killing children, so you can still do it, but I'd like you to pay me for it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's entirely part of this money grabbing scheme to take as much money out of the middle class and lower classes as possible, to make it basically that everyone has to move out of London, no one can function in London, because they're the cash cow of these bureaucrats, really.
They have been for quite some time.
And it's no coincidence, I think, that this coincides with a significant hole in TfL's finances that came from
TfL,
Sadiq
which is
Khan.
Transport for London.
Yes, came from Sadiq Khan's lockdown policies and really quite short-sighted price controls for last year. So
I also think he doesn't really want ULEZ. What he wants is the cameras in place so that in 2 to 3 years' time he can move to road charging and make even more money, and he can't do that without these cameras, so it's a really good way of getting them in.
Now, there is an argument to be said for the fact that if you have a city with good connectivity, and there are certain cities, not all cities have good connectivity, I would argue. Yeah. There are some with better networks than others. And there are many people who would argue that London is incredibly well served.
Not if you're a painter and decorator or a bricklayer or...
That is the problem. It's not what I'm talking about is talking about, because this is not just about people with old vans or old that they're using, it's not just about tradesmen. It's about anybody who has a vehicle which does not meet this criteria, and which is a very particular, I think it's anything over 8, is it between 8 and 40? Because over 40 years old it's exempt, is that right? Is it 8 years or maybe it's 12 years? Anyway, whatever it is. So. Yeah, it's some kind of years.
But I mean, even if you're going on the Central Line this morning, for example, you're stuffed. If you are someone who usually goes in the car and you might use public transport as an alternative, it's absolutely vital that if you're going to implement policies like this, then public transport networks have to be absolutely pristine. It does not look like they're going to be improving, and I think anybody who uses the tube, for example, will tell you that things have got worse and not better over the past few months.
I also think women are really discriminated against by this, because women still, whether you like it or not, are the main carers of children. They're the people who shift their children around from school to clubs and get them where they need to be, and they just can't do that. I know, I am one. I do have one of those little people, and I also have a job. So I couldn't do that on a tube, and I couldn't because of where I live. I'm a 20-minute walk from any tube station, even though I do live in London, and I couldn't do that with a 4-year-old. It would take hours as she picked flowers and did things like that.
There's also the problem of, like, how horrible is the tube as an experience for the majority of women who take it? I mean, that just me going by myself, I always feel like there's someone there that's kind of creepy, and there are people there that are just not, they're antisocial people, and when you have a child, you don't really want to put them in the midst of individuals like that, or the huge crowds that come with it, or the inconsideration that people have for space and for, you know,
well, I mean, you could argue that about any public transport, couldn't you? You could say,
yes, it's more disabled access.
But I mean, they'll make all these sacrifices knowing that they will make a negligible difference to London's air quality, so it all comes good in the end, right?
Right, so the ULEZ these ULEZ zones. I was going to say ULEZ zones, but then that's repeating the Z part, aren't you? But anyway,
it's not going down well in this room.
It's not going down well. Let's move on to the second topic then. This is about the nurses' strike and where you stand on that. Layla, first of all.
I think the majority of the issue lies within the union leaders themselves. They have hyped up their members to such a point where they say, you know, the initial request was 19% pay rise, I believe, and they told their members that this was going to be possible. They told them that they deserved to have this increase, that they've had these pay cuts. And when you push people and rile them up in this way, they're not going to accept the pay offer that's been given to them by the government. They're going to think, oh, that's beneath me because I've been told by the people who are leading me that this is I should be striving for more. So it's only reasonable for them to think, well, this is ridiculous. It's the leaders that have completely misled their members.
You think it's the union that is at fault?
Absolutely, yes.
Harrison?
I think it's the state fundamentally, because the process you've just described when it comes to union leaders and union members is absolutely spot on. I think there's an extra step in the incentive structure that leads to that is created by the state's de facto monopoly on healthcare in this country. So everybody is suffering through a cost of living crisis at the moment. That's absolutely right. And so naturally they want to improve their own wages and working conditions.
Of course they do.
But for healthcare workers, basically the only way to the only employer is the state, and so they are going to, and so unions are going to do all they can to leverage that single employer. Whereas when we're talking about something like a plumber or electrician, we don't really have these same very politicised, very emotive conversations about what do you deserve to be paid. Well, you'll deserve to be paid what someone's willing to pay.
But you're talking about people who 4 years ago, we were clapping. We were so grateful that they were there, that they were going to work, that they were putting their lives on the line. These are the people who, they generally have the public on their side, don't they? And therefore, there is an argument to be said for why not introduce, okay, so we get taxed quite a lot, but there would be many people who would say, if I could guarantee that part of my tax was going to the National Health Service, they'd pay it.
No, I would say I pay far too much tax as it is. I'm happy with what I'm paying. I'm not asking you to take it down, although that would be nice. Why don't we make the NHS efficient and use the money that's in there? You know, there's £200 billion goes into the NHS almost every year. Get rid of all of these senior managers and give it to the nurses and the doctors. Just redistribute it.
There is also this other problem, isn't there, about the fact that we are living longer and we have more comorbidities. That's another problem. So the NHS, the need for money for the NHS goes up and up and up. And also every time there's a new drug, for example, every time there's a new procedure, every time there's something that can save somebody, it means that people then say, but I want this. This is what I want for me.
But then why are we not allowed as taxpayers to say, well, I want you to look after yourself a little bit better. I want you to not be obese and get diabetes.
I was going to say the same thing. I think there's not been a focus on preventative measures, and I mean there's countless studies that you can look at that show that preventative measures decrease the expenditure by 40%.
We actually mentioned that this morning, in fact.
So it's something that is mind-boggling for a government that runs its healthcare system.
But they do deserve more money, of course they do. But then let's use the money that we've got and redistribute. And also, let's make the NHS a place where people feel like they're valued when they go to work, because I can tell you they do not.
Yes, I think that's the point.
All of this is, again, a product of the fact that the service is basically monopolised by one governing entity. So you talk about the issue with managers, for example. Well, the NHS actually has, the UK's healthcare system has a sort of quite low level of bureaucratic planners, as it were, compared to other systems, partly because of this political talking point, which does say, well, why don't we just give it to the nurses? Well, there are an optimal number of managers. I don't know what it is. I could not pull a number out for you, and nobody, being honest with you, could say they could either. It's about the process that's put in place to determine the balance between managers and people on the ground, the balance between sort of risk and healthcare payments, for the number of nurses there should be and how much money they should earn. I cannot, and no person, no matter how intelligent they are, can tell you what the answer to all those questions are. It's about having a competitive market process that determines what people are willing to pay and what their value is in that marketplace, I think.
Can we move on to the next topic then, which is, should A&E be excluded from strikes? Harrison, if you kick off with this one.
Well, yes, I mean, but at the same time, it's very difficult to draw the line exactly about, well, what's so important that people need to avoid taking this strike action. The reason that they are striking is because they are leveraging their ability to walk out in order to force the single employer, the government, to pay them more money. They want to use the maximum amount of leverage they can to get more money. A&E will do that for them. But then, OK, so you exempt A&E. That's a really important one. Well, at what stage do you get to the point where it's not that important anymore? You're going to tell someone that their planned surgery is not important enough. Yeah, I think it's difficult to draw the line. But yeah, in theory, absolutely. People are going to suffer and die as a result of this strike action. We really do need to get away from this idea that they're doing this for the patients. It's not true. They're entitled to pursue their own interests. They're entitled to want their wages to go up. But just be honest that that's what you're doing, because that's what everyone does.
Yeah, and there's already been statistics published about the first 2 weeks of strike. And
we've talked about that a bit earlier on. We've talked about the way that statistics can be manipulated, though, and how it's very difficult to actually look at the actual what is actually happening, and also what actually happens later, that it doesn't necessarily happen then, but because, as we know, with some health issues you can manage and it won't come out in the statistics. The time that it goes wrong is months down the line, when it's not counted in that in the strike days.
I think everybody has the right to withdraw their labour, and I have always defended that. I supported the last 2016 junior doctors strike. In fact, I left the BMA because I thought they'd let down the junior doctors so badly. But I think when you go from 0 to 3-day strikes, 4-day strikes, this next nurses one is hooked onto a bank holiday. So this last doctor strike wasn't 4 days, it was 8 days, because it was hooked onto a bank holiday. I think then we have to say, well, hang on a minute, you are being so extreme that perhaps we do have a minimal service level, perhaps we do say no. You know, I think you can push people so far.
Yeah. Let's move on to another story. The papers are full of it. You've got lots of pullouts today. I think there's one on every single paper, actually, which is that there's an 8-page entry special in the Mail that I'm looking at there, which is
only 8.
Yeah, only 8. Yes. Well, there is. I think one of them is virtually a book. Virtually the whole paper, all about the Grand National. The thing is, of course, that animal rights activists are trying to stop the Grand National. If I can come to you first, Leyland, on this one.
Yeah, I mean, in my honest opinion, is I think people are bored. I think people really, really need to get better hobbies, because this is just like the Just Stop Oil protesters. They're looking for things to do, and this is the next thing to be outraged at. This is the next thing to be angry at.
To be fair, they do it every year. So it's not as though this is suddenly a new thing.
And the suffragettes did do it.
And the suffragettes did it, of course.
Not that I actually put these people on a par with suffragettes.
And also they weren't
certainly think of themselves as
and they weren't trying to actually do anything to do with the actual horses. They were just trying to make a protest at the time. Whereas this is about the treatment of horses.
I think horses are actually treated quite well in modern day, with modern day technology and modern day veterinary science. It is quite insulting to veterinarians and their practice that they think that animals are being mistreated in this way. Horses are working animals. They are very powerful animals. They are more than capable of running a couple laps of a
it's about the jumps on the Grand National, though, isn't it? It's about jumps. It's always about jumps, I think.
We do have Grand Nationals now where no horses have died. It's got much, much better. They have improved the jumps as far as they can. I think the Grand National without jumps would be Not very exciting.
It would be a flat race, I think it would be called.
Not very exciting.
Harrison, your thoughts?
I do have quite a lot of sympathy with the animal rights cause, actually. Strange as it is to say, I'm sort of lifelong vegetarian and whatnot, but the problem I have with this type of action is that it doesn't do us any favours. If you want to improve the lot of any given animal in any given circumstance, the idea is not to disrupt individuals enjoying events like the Grand National, because it really will just turn them against you. These things need to be done slow and incrementally, and they need to be done in a way that people can have faith in it and not feel like they're important parts of their lives and things that they enjoy are being undermined by it. I don't think people should eat meat, but I think banning meat would be a very bad and ineffective idea. So it's all about persuasion and convincing people.
This is the point, isn't it? This is the finger wagging. Look, I'm telling you not to do this, even though you really like it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not going to work.
It's not going to work, and it's not going to help you in the long run.
No.
As you say, I think it is people who are bored.
Yeah.
Oh, really? You think it's people who are bored as well?
White, middle-class children do this. They do. If you look at all of them, the Extinction Rebellion, they're all called Tolkien and Annabella, and there's no black people, there's no Asian people protesting and gluing themselves to floors. This is a very white middle class pastime.
And old is something I've noticed quite a lot recently as well.
Be careful who you call old now.
I do apologise. Older, yes. Particularly when people are gluing themselves to things. I was surprised to see the number of people who do look
using glue
a
made
little
from
on
oil.
the senior side.
Using glue made from oil.
Oh, yes. Of course. Yeah.
Well, yes. That's quite. Our final topic. I do want to just very briefly talk about AI. But before that, this is a story about 2 Met police officers sacked over offensive WhatsApp messages, and the question is about solving the problem with the Met. Do you think there is? That there do seem to be. There does seem to be a bit of a movement about actually getting to grips with being able to sack these rogue police officers, which I hadn't realised until Mark Rowley said that they can't, that they couldn't. Layla, your turn this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very important step forward to be removing these people from the police force. I mean, the recent report that came out, the Casey report, was just horrific reading. It was something that was shocking, and the incidents that they cite are just something that you wouldn't imagine someone was capable of doing. Nevertheless, someone who is in a position of power and authority, someone who is meant to be an upstanding citizen and enforcing the laws of the land and the morality of the land, but that's not at all the case. And I think it's a very clear indication of the structure that is in place, which is people are not being motivated or being incentivized to join the police force, especially the people who are top performers, who are, the kind of ideal candidates that we're looking for. And the few that do join the police force are very quickly promoted through because they need people to fill senior positions to be able to sort of hand it down. So I think the majority of, especially low-level policemen, are people who weren't able to be promoted very quickly, or they're people who don't have a lot of experience. And it's just...
and they're not very clever, are they? Because they're using WhatsApp groups that they know are going to get leaked eventually. Yeah. I mean, this banter will probably always go on in a locker room somewhere. But the fact that they're putting it into a WhatsApp group, and, all of our police now have to have a degree, and they're still not very clever.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't think that having a degree and cleverness. I
think that's a very good point.
Necessarily, you can be very, very clever, but still a bit.
Point taken.
Let's face it. Yeah. Let's face it. Harrison,
lack of common sense, as my mum would say.
Yeah, lack of common sense. I think yes, you can be clever, but lack common sense.
Yes. She often says it to me, by the way.
Does she indeed?
Yes. But yeah, I mean,
is that when you're badly stacking the dishwasher?
Yes, actually, almost always. Yeah, I mean, I think it demonstrates as if we needed any more evidence that there is a sort of pervasive culture of really quite vile behaviour among certainly the lower rungs of the Met Police. I don't know exactly what reform looks like. It's certainly not my area of expertise. I don't know whether it's a wholesale sort of decentralisation of the force, maybe have the 32 boroughs taking more control, or whether it's just purely symbolic, just changing the structure at the top of the organisation and the name, as was the case in Northern Ireland, changing it from the RUC to the PSNI. But
should we ban them using WhatsApp groups as well, maybe?
I think they just... the trouble is that if you ban... It's like all of these things, isn't it? You ban one thing, there's always a way. There's always a way that somebody finds, there's somebody...
I mean, the online safety bill is probably going to push WhatsApp out of the UK anyway, so, that'll do on the other side.
What will we all do? How will families meet up?
Go out to the park?
Go out to the park. So if I can just ask you then about the story about artificial intelligence, then, that every day there's another story about artificial intelligence. I was reading a terrifying article in one magazine all about how artificial intelligence will get to a stage where the robots can talk to the robots and actually have conversations that will then completely move out of any of our sphere. They will be actually able to say, do you know what, let's just cut out the humans. We don't need those. We'll just start doing things themselves. But let's before going on into those realms, this is a story in one of the papers today about the jobs. If you want a job that artificial intelligence is not going to take, be a gardener. It's saying, although I'd have said gardening. AI couldn't not. There are those apps now where you go, that's a good plant, that's a good plant, that's a bad plant. Do you worry, Harrison, about your job?
Yeah, a little bit. ChatGPT has already proved alarmingly useful in my area of expertise in communications, at the very least.
Course.
I'm still getting to grips with it a bit, but it's developing very quickly, and maybe they'll be able to replace me with a robot. I do mow a good lawn, though, so I'll be absolutely fine in the garden.
Give me your number after.
Do you do that thing with stripes?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah, you have to have stripes.
Stripes?
That's the whole point. You look from the window at the back garden.
And you know the gardener's been.
Definitely. But yeah, I mean, I think for a heck of a lot of people, particularly in our sort of profession, it's a little bit alarming to see the specific areas in which you add value, as they often say is the buzzword these days, can be quite easily
being
replicated.
A human.
Yes, but because there was, did you see that the Q80, the unveiling of the Q80 newsreader looks a bit roboty at the moment, but yes, but what kind of, and what she pops up and she says, what kind of news do you want to hear from me? And of course they'll get it better, and that will mean...
When are you going to unplug yourself?
But it is going to be difficult, because in the future, of course, you're going to say, is that actually a real person, or is that like the Pope in the big puffy coat?
Do you know, I say all of this having been to the ABBA Avatar, and my mind was blown.
No, I found it very difficult. I found it quite difficult to applaud something that wasn't there. And at that point, I've just noticed the time. It's time to say thank you very much. That is Layla Softage and Harrison Griffiths. Thank you very much.